Are you thinking about moving overseas with your pet, but worried it might be risky or expensive? That was our concern when we started planning our move abroad. You see, my partner and I are getting ready to retire, but not in the U.S. Moving to another country is the only way we can afford the kind of life we want. And we'd be packing our bags right now if not for one major roadblock. This little guy is an important member of our family, so leaving him behind is not an option. And getting him to another country safely is a lot more complicated than you might think. Here's what we found out when we tried to make it work on a $5,000 budget. I mean, we haven't actually decided where we're going to move yet, but we chose Panama as our sort of hypothetical destination because it's relatively close, so we figured that would give us the best chance to stay within our budget and keep Wally's travel time to a minimum. So we looked into commercial airlines, private charters, pet relocation services, and even traveling by sea or land. And not surprisingly, every option comes with its own set of risks, costs, and complications. And the more pet-friendly the option, the more it costs. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Why not just bring them on the plane with you? It doesn't cost that much, certainly not $5,000. But there's one important condition we put on our challenge. We had to be able to do it without traumatizing Wally or endangering ourselves. And as you can see, Wally's a little too big to put under the seat in front of us on the plane, so he'd have to go in the hold. And at his age and with his separation anxiety, we just couldn't do that to him. Of course, for a lot of you, that may just be the solution. So if you think that flying in the hold might be the right option for your pet, then you'll want to check out our next video where I'll take a deep dive into shipping pets as air cargo. So be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification button to be sure to catch it. But for the rest of you, let's get into our first option, driving. So at first blush, ground transportation seemed like a great option. Wally loves to go for a ride in the car. In fact, sometimes we just put him in the car and drive around the block and he is happy as can be. So we know he'd hold up well on a long trip. And of course, since we're retiring, we'd be in no hurry to get there. So we could take, a month to get down there, stopping in pet-friendly hotels along the way and no problem. And as you can see, it would be a very long trip. From where we live in the southeastern United States to Panama is approximately 3,700 miles, which comes out to about 73 hours of straight driving and 7 border crossings. Depending on the route we chose, we'd be going through Mexico, Guatemala, optionally El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama. And the cost, according to Rome to Rio for gas, would be anywhere from $804 to $1,161. So that's still well under our $5,000 budget. But in addition to that, you have other things to consider like tolls, border fees, bribes, yes, bribes, lodging along the way. Still in all, even though those can bump it up considerably, we're still, I think, well under our $5,000 budget. So above and beyond the actual travel cost, you've got bureaucratic and logistical concerns to deal with, and those are going to cost some money too. For example, for every border that you cross, you've got to get a temporary vehicle import permit, and that comes along with a fee, of course. And then you've also got to get insurance for your vehicle for every country, and you can generally buy that at the border. So your borders are going to be holding you up quite a bit time-wise, as well as costing you a bit of money and dealing with a lot of bureaucracy. And not only do you have to get your vehicle across every border, but you have to get your pet across too. And that's going to involve a lot of paperwork and fees. I know, Wally, I hate red tape as much as you do. At a minimum, you're going to need a rabies vaccination certificate and a health certificate from your vet that's endorsed by the USDA. And in addition to that, every country is going to have its own requirements. For example, in Guatemala, you're going to need a health certificate that's translated into Spanish, and it can't be any older than 10 days. Plus, you're going to need a vaccination card. And in Costa Rica, the health certificate has to be endorsed by the IPSA, which is their Ministry of Agriculture if you're coming from Nicaragua, plus the rabies vaccine, plus vaccines for distemper, hepatitis, leptospirosis, and parvovirus. In addition to that, you need deworming and flea and tick treatment. And these are all checked at the border. Costa Rica is very unforgiving, so you need to have all that in order before you even leave home. Now, all that being said, even though a lot of the requirements are very strict and you've got all your paperwork in order when you get to the border, you might find out that it was all in vain. For example, when I moved my 3 cats down to Mexico, I got all the paperwork in order. I had all their certificates. Everything was translated into Spanish. And it was, no small extent an expenditure of time and effort. And I got to the border and they asked if I had anything to declare. We were driving in. And I said gatos, which is Spanish for cats. And they're like, gatos de qué? And it's like, gatos, animales, animals. They're like, oh, pfft. They didn't even look at my paperwork. And they just waved us on through. And I found out later that gatos is also slang for a jack, like you use to jack up your car when you have a flat tire. So all that preparation was for nothing, but the way I look at it, better safe than sorry, because you could be very easily underprepared and you could get a stickler at the border, and some borders, as I said, are easier than others. And Costa Rica, you're definitely not going to get through without all of those things in order. So I know that a lot of countries require an initial period of quarantine when you move a pet into the country. For example, Panama has a home quarantine for 30 days after you move in. So I was wondering if, when you go into each of these countries along the way, are you going to have a quarantine requirement if you're just passing through? So I looked into that, and apparently not. If you're just passing through, you can keep on going. But that would be a good thing to double check if you're planning on doing a road trip through Central America. But regardless of how well prepared you are and how smoothly everything goes at the borders, you can expect quite a few delays at the crossings. Some of them can be hours long depending on what's going on, what they're looking for, not just with respect to you, but all the other people who come before you. And of course, a lot of heavy bureaucracy and random inspections. So that's the bureaucratic end of things. Now, what about road conditions? Well, they can be pretty variable. Mexico and Costa Rica have pretty decent major highways, but in Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, there are rough stretches and potholes and poorly marked roads, which can be a real hazard, especially if you don't speak Spanish, because you don't want to get lost on a long trip like that. And tolls are pretty common, so you're going to want to carry a lot of small change and in the currency of the country that you're in, so you can pay those tolls. And you'll probably need to pay your bribes in the local currency as well. The bribes in some places may be negotiable, not whether or not you can pay them, but how much. And then we come to safety. And that can be pretty variable as well, but a lot of these countries that we're talking about are not very safe to drive through. When I was living in Mexico, I considered it to be a pretty safe country. And even at that time, there were some risks involved, but these days it's a lot worse. There's a lot more in the way of drug cartels and gangs, theft, and police corruption has always been a problem there. And the same is true in Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. They have real security risks. And the U.S. State Department website has a lot of information on that. But, to be realistic, how well can they keep up with the individual movement of gangs and robbers and things like that? So that is a real concern. Police checkpoints, which you might consider to be a safe place, can also be a real hazard because the police are armed, they're poorly paid, and so they rely heavily on extracting bribes in order to make a living. And, you just don't want to be caught out, and misunderstandings, especially if you don't speak the language, can be disastrous. I do speak the language, I speak it pretty well, and I have had police stops when driving through Mexico, and it wasn't a problem, but you just never know. you can sort of maximize your safety or at least minimize your risks somewhat by sticking to the main highways, driving only during daylight hours and avoiding risky regions. And some people, people do still drive down through there. A lot of times they join convoys of other travelers for safety, I guess strength in numbers. But I mean, to tell you the truth, if you're up against armed robbers and they're determined, what are you going to do? Even if there's 5 cars together, you're still going to be victimized. I'm not trying to be hysterical about this or a fearmonger or anything. I mean, I have stared down the barrel of an army tank in Mexico, and I wasn't really worried about it. So I'm not easily scared by things like this, but I'm also realistic, and it's really important to do your research before you go to decide if you want to go. We decided not to risk it. We thought, it's just too risky, and we don't want anything to happen to us or to Wally. But if you decide to do it, a few things that you want to keep in mind are to, before you go, get a GPS that you can use offline with maps. Don't trust cell coverage anywhere because it can be pretty spotty. So you want to make sure you know where you're going, up to date on the latest, road construction and hiccups along the way, all that kind of stuff. You do want to carry cash and small bills for border fees, tolls, and again, bribes. And you want to have lots and lots of photocopies of all your documents multiple times because you're going to need them at every border. Maybe if you just have one set, you don't know if the border guard is going to keep that documentation. So you want to double up, triple up, quadruple up. And then don't camp out in the wild. You do want to stay at safe hotels. Just keep your risk to a minimum. And if you're having difficulty communicating at the borders, especially if you don't speak Spanish, they do have border helpers that you can hire that are called tramitadores. And if things seem overwhelming, you can hire somebody to help you communicate and sort of navigate things for you. Be sure you buy insurance in every country. That, again, is usually available at the borders or near the borders. And use a Facebook group like Pan American Travelers Association for real-time updates and also to find other travelers that you can convoy up with. But for us, we decided not to do it. So the next thing we looked at was marine transport. So the first thing that came to my mind was cruise liners. I thought, why not just take Wally on a cruise with us and get off at the Panama Canal? It would be a lot of fun, lots of space for him to move around in. Well, it turns out you can't do that. There is only one cruise liner that allows pets that are not, like seeing eye dogs or something like that. What do they call those? Service pets, yes. There's only one cruise liner that allows that, and that is Cunard's Queen Mary 2, which only does transatlantic cruises. So we can't get Wally to Panama there. However, just as added information, the Queen Mary goes from New York, Miami, and Fort Lauderdale. Those are its departure ports, and from there you can take it to Southampton, England, Hamburg, Germany, Le Havre in France, or Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And to take a dog along with you, it costs between $800 and $1,000. And the cheapest fare that they have for an interior cabin is $14.79 per person. That's from Miami to Hamburg. At least that was the cheapest I was able to find. And that's a 7-night cruise. And so the total cost for 2 of us plus one of him would be $39.58. So that's still under our budget if we decide to go to Europe instead. And then of course you have to figure in the train fares to wherever we would decide to go. But when I was living in Europe, I saw people on the trains with dogs all the time. So that's very doable. And I have a friend from Slovakia. She travels with her dogs everywhere. So if we decide to do that at some point, I'm going to hit her up for some tips. But anyway, a cruise liner to Panama is out. There is, however, a very interesting development. There's a company called Happy Tails, and they're sponsoring the first ever dog-centered cruise from Tampa, Florida, and it's going to be in November 18th to 24th of 2025. If you're watching that this year, you still have time maybe. And it's called the Margaritaville Cruise. And it's a 6-night cruise, and it's got all kinds of amenities like a pet butler for every cabin, pet relief areas, activities and services for dogs, including like a fashion show. I'm kidding. I'm not kidding you. They have an onboard vet. They have snacks for your dogs. It's really just geared for people who want to take their dog on a cruise, and the cost is $1,500 per dog. For people, it's between $1,700 and $3,550 per person, double occupancy, or $3,060 for a single. So the total for both of us, plus Wally, to take that cruise would be $4,900, still under our budget. Of course, we'd have to factor in one-way car rental to Tampa, so that would add to the cost. And we don't have any information on the destinations that this cruise is stopping at, or whether or not one-way travel is allowed. And this is kind of a one-time sort of testing the waters kind of a cruise, but they hope to do future cruises. So, and unfortunately for us, this cruise is only for dogs under 20 pounds. So as you can see, Wally doesn't qualify. He's a healthy 38 pounds. But sea travel wasn't totally off the boards yet. We looked into freighters and cargo ships. Unfortunately, animals are not allowed that route. In fact, most of them don't even allow people as passengers. So then we thought, well, what about a private yacht? How much would that cost to rent? And as you would expect, it's prohibitively expensive. The prices I saw ranged between $15,000 and $20,000 per week, plus the cost of the crew and the fuel and the food, probably food for the crew as well, plus a hefty deposit of about $5,000. So that option is clearly out for us. But we knew about something called empty leg travel, otherwise known as hitching a ride, where, for example, if a boat's going someplace on a mission and it's coming back empty, it behooves them to sort of rent out their space for passengers because they're not going to be earning anything on the way back anyway. A lot of them will do that in exchange for a fare plus costs, or you could hire on as a crew and lend a helping hand if you have any sailing skills. So we identified a lot of websites that help boats find crew members: crewfinders.com, crewseekers.net, crewbay.com, findacrew.net. There's a lot of them. The only one we found that we would even remotely qualify was crewbay.com, because a lot of the captains, or at least a fair number of them, are just looking for company. And we qualify for that. I think we're good company. I know Wally is. So we kind of looked at that, and we're going to keep our eyes open. We didn't see a cruise specifically that was going to Panama or any of the other places that we're considering, but we're going to keep our eyes open for that. And so boat travel is not completely off the boards yet. Meanwhile, let's look at private planes. As you might expect, chartering a private plane does not come anywhere near our budget. The prices I saw range quite a bit. They range between $25,000 and $130,000. So right away, we're striking that one off the list. But we did manage to find a few companies that specialize in pet travel by air, and these are really intriguing. In these, you travel in small jets with other pet owners who also have their pets with them, and regardless of the size of your pet, they travel in the cabin with you. And they don't have to be locked up in a crate. They can sit on a seat, they can be in the aisle, they can roam around. Sounds ideal, right? And we identified a few of these. The first one I'm going to talk about is called Perro Air. Perro is Spanish for dog. They don't have their own planes. What they do is they find empty legs, like we talked about with the yachts, and they find passengers to fill those jets. So you'd be traveling on a small jet with other pet owners. And the typical starting price per person plus one dog, the dog's included in the price, on Pero Air is $7,200. Of course, it depends on the destination and a bunch of other factors. I don't think they charge extra for big dogs or anything like that. It's basically the person plus the pet. Unfortunately, they do not travel to Panama or anywhere in Central or South America at this time, but they do have a place on their website where you can suggest a route. So I imagine if they get enough suggestions for a particular route, that they'll probably do a flight to that area. And the next one we found was called Bark Air, and that one travels also only to Europe, but for example, New York to Lisbon for one person and one dog is $8,000. And then we found one called K9 Jets, and that one flies from New Jersey to Europe, Australia, and Toronto. And just as an example, New Jersey to Lisbon is $11,850, and that was already sold out for October, which was the month that I was checking. Unfortunately for us, none of these go to the destination that we chose. And they're all outside of our budget, but the first two are not that far outside of our budget. So if we're really desperate to leave and get started in our retirement, we might want to consider Europe. You wouldn't mind being a European dog, would you, Wally, and hanging out at cafes? One of the great things about cafes in a lot of European places, I especially noticed in Prague, is that you can go into a cafe or a pub to eat and they will bring a bowl of water for your dog. You can bring your dog in. They'll even, if you have pet food, they'll even bring a bowl for his pet food. So it's really a pet-friendly continent. But anyway, I digress. Let's move on to what are known as pet relocation services. These are companies that specialize in helping you get your pet from point A to point B. I was pretty optimistic at first when I started looking into this because I thought, oh, these are going to be people who think outside the box. And what I found was that for the most part, they are not thinking outside the box. As far as I could tell, most of them do pretty much what you could do on your own. They offer services like pet nannies who will go on the plane with your pet on a commercial airliner, whether your pet is going in the cabin or in the hold, and they'll take care of the paperwork, customs clearance, all that kind of stuff. And so if you're nervous about paperwork, that could be a valuable service. I don't want to say that it's not, but they do charge a hefty price for it in the thousands of dollars, like anywhere from mid-hundreds to a few $1,000s to do all that. I suppose that also depends on whether the nanny is going with or whether they're just handling the paperwork going to or coming from. But if your pet's going on the cargo, your pet's going in the cargo. And whether it's you or somebody else, I don't see any substantial difference for Wally's experience. So that just didn't seem worth it to me. The only advantage I can see is if for some reason your pet can't travel at the same time that you do, or maybe you have too much luggage to handle or something and you can't deal with it, or if you're really nervous about customs and immigration with the pet. For example, a lot of military people, they're deployed overseas and they have to travel by a different way and they can't take the pet with them. So then it really does come in handy for them to hire somebody to do that for them. Very few of these companies offer ground transportation. Most of them just help you with dealing with commercial airlines. I did also manage to find a few companies that advertise themselves as international pet ground transport services. And that actually looks like a good service if you're willing to hand your pet over to a stranger for that long. They offer door-to-door service, and their office tracks the driver's location by GPS at every step along the way, and the driver will send you 2 to 3 photos of your pet every day in real time. So I looked at the website of one of these companies. It's called Happy Tails, and by the way, that's the same company that's doing that Margaritaville cruise that I talked about earlier, the one from Tampa. So obviously they're going to be very dog oriented, which is a good sign for us. And their website didn't specifically say if they go to Panama, but it did mention international ground transport. And the way their fees are structured, they go by a setup fee plus mileage. So I calculated that out, and for our trip, it would be about $5,700 to $7,350 for the trip. So still a bit above our budget, but not outrageously so. So I contacted them with our parameters, and unfortunately they said that they cannot currently go to Panama. They didn't say why, but that was a no-go. I checked another one called World Pet Travel, and they wrote back to me, and they really discouraged the whole idea, said that is not something they would consider because of all the countries that you have to go through, and the stress on the pet and the driver. And they gave an estimate anyway, and their estimate was between $20,000 and $25,000 for that trip. So a ground transportation company seems to be out of the question for Panama. So bottom line is, even if we did find a ground transport company that would take Wally to Panama, they'd be running into the same dangers that we would have if we took him ourselves. And even though we'd be saving ourselves from those dangers, we don't want to put Wally through that. And with his separation anxiety, 7 days is a lot longer than the 3 hours he would spend in the cargo hold of a commercial airliner. So that option is also out. And at the end of the day, we still have not found a feasible option for getting Wally to Panama unless one of the boat captains comes through for us. And we'll keep checking with Crew Bay from time to time. But for now, it just doesn't seem doable. So our options right now are either to wait for our move till the end of Wally's life, go to Europe on Cunard or one of those other jets, or, Wally, what do you think about sprouting wings of your own and flying to Panama? Well, I guess that gives us an idea what he thinks about that. So if you're as discouraged as we are about the possibility of getting your pet overseas by some method other than commercial airliner, and you're thinking that you might just need to put your pet in the cargo hold, no, we're not going to do it to you, Wally. Check out our next video where we take a deep dive into the pros and cons of shipping your pet as cargo. See you next time. Okay.